problem-ridden sources, lack of sleep, parcel carriers with bad timing, that and more in the new channel update. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and I welcome you to the channel update February. We discussed some interesting topics in recent weeks, starting with a talk about critical thinking. Critical thinking is no fun, but the video was fun. I enjoyed it and I think it shows what direction those soft skill talks can take and how they can be a nice addition to our other videos. After that, we discussed a very specific issue, very specific topic, the so-called Bildungsurlaub, educational leave in Germany. Now, this is probably relevant for not so many of you, but if there are some of you who work and live in Germany but don't speak German that well, this might be a nice occasion to learn a bit about Bildungsurlaub, which is quite nice but not so widely known even here in Germany. After that, there was of course a book review. Matthew Walker's Why We Sleep. Oh, this seemed so easy at the beginning. A well-known book, popular, interesting topic. I thought I could close a gap on the channel because we discussed sleep, we discussed stress before, but we didn't really discuss sleep, and sleep is important as well. So I thought, oh, this fits nicely. Well, it turned out a bit different. I will say a few words about that later. But first, let's have a look at our upcoming topics. Next week there will be another soft skill talk. This time we will discuss matters of self-efficacy and responsibility. We will try to figure out who is to blame for everything. This is an interesting matter and we will talk about it a bit. And after that we will continue our exploration of biases and fallacies with a video about the sunk cost fallacy. If you say, oh, I've invested so much money and time and effort into this, I can't quit now, you're a victim of the sunk cost fallacy. You've probably all experienced that before. I certainly have. So it is a topic that is quite relevant for our day-to-day lives. After that, we will have a look at Occam's razor. This is a heuristic, a rule of thumb that is used in a scientific context. Simplified, it is if there are several possible explanations for something, I prefer the simplest explanation. And we will find out what this is about, how this works, and discover what it's all about. And of course, there is another book review coming. And this time we will take a look at How We Learn by Stanislas Dehaene. Some of you might remember that we discussed another book by Dehaene before, and that was Reading in the Brain. That was quite nice, quite an interesting book. I liked it a lot. And later I discovered that Dehaene had written another book, this time about the topic of learning, again from the perspective of neuroscience. And this is, of course, an interesting topic. It is relevant for me due to my work as a freelance trainer, and it is quite an interesting topic for the channel. And I plan to have more topics about learning and knowledge management in the future. So this book is a nice start. But let's get back to another book. Last week's Why We Sleep. Now, this was a bumpy creation process. At first, things went smoothly. I finished reading and taking notes in time, started working on the script, everything was nice, I liked the book. But then I discovered that there is quite heavy and fundamental criticism of the book. And that critics have pointed out lots of severe mistakes and inaccuracies in the book. Now that threw me off track a bit. And things didn't stop there. The Friday before we did the recording, we received some bad news. Well, no big tragedy, but we lost some money and it threw our plans a bit off balance. Then Saturday came where we wanted to do the recording. First, the internet did not work. Well, after a while it was fixed and we did our first recording. First starting with the German version, and it went really well. It went smoothly, it was a good recording, but near the end, when we had already reached the critique section, the doorbell rang because a parcel had arrived. So we did another recording. Again, it went well. We were near the end. In the critique section again, the doorbell rang again because another parcel came. How can there be such awful timing? Well, the third attempt at the German video worked out. After that, we had 2 more attempts to get the English version done. So in total, we recorded 5 30-minute videos on that Saturday. You can imagine that was not excessively fun, but I think the video turned out nicely in the end. There are 2 topics here I would like to say a few more words about. First, the issue of problematic and flawed sources, and then the topic of sleep and sleeping better. First, about the sources. I think it fits the occasion because we had the talk about critical thinking, where we learned we should be skeptical, not believe everything. And we also discussed the issue of sources before on the channel, for example, in the video Are Soft Skills Just Scams? And also in the video Can You Trust Me? But there we focused on selecting good sources. However, even if we do that properly, we might still end up with a source that is flawed. So this leads to the question, how much trust should we put into what we read in a book? Now we have to consider, first of all, that the scientific findings in the book, they represent the current state of knowledge, the current level of scientific exploration. However, in the future, there may always be new findings that might render some of the previous ones obsolete. So they might be kind of temporary. Then I have to take into account if I venture forth into a new area, a new topic I haven't dealt with before, I won't easily be able to place the author of my choice within that topic. I can distinguish if this author represents the current level of knowledge and what is currently agreed upon in that field, or whether it might be an author that has some exotic position, so I can't easily tell that at the beginning. And furthermore, even if my author is great and represents the accepted state of knowledge, I still have to consider that there is probably no expert in any field who really knows everything about that field, who has read everything that that was published in that field. You have to consider that there is research in all countries around the world, and papers and books are published in plenty of languages, and a lot of them are not translated into other languages, not translated into English. So even an expert in their field won't have read everything that has been discovered worldwide. And we always have to expect that an author will be biased to some extent. In our exploration of biases and fallacies, we've learned that being unbiased is not something that comes easily, but something that takes a lot of work and effort, so it probably won't occur that often. And furthermore, we have to take into account that an author also writes for commercial success, so he will present his material in a way that appeals to a wider audience, and this might also hurt the level of trustworthiness. Now, there are usually critiques. I guess for every book that was ever published, there is someone who says, oh, this is a crappy book and the author is an idiot. However, we have to distinguish what exactly is criticized. For example, if the conclusions are criticized, if the critic says, well, the facts and the proof are fine, however, the conclusions the author draws from them, I don't agree with them, then this is perfectly fine, because conclusions are debatable, especially if we venture into the realm of opinions or even ideologies. Those are all matter of opinion. They are always debatable. However, if the facts are questioned, as was the case for Why We Sleep, if someone says, wait a moment, there are things described here that are in fact incorrect or inaccurate and I can prove it, then of course this is a major problem. Then we cannot trust the book. And here obviously the critical thinking topic applies, and as I said in the talk about critical thinking is often not fun. And it wasn't here, because when I first read the book, I quite enjoyed it and I liked it and I thought it was a great book. But then I found out that a lot of the facts are inaccurate or outright wrong. And of course, this was a big disappointment for me. Now, let me say a few words about sleep, because some of you probably looked forward to the book review thinking, oh, well, I will learn interesting things about sleep, maybe get some practical advice, and since we can't trust the book that much, this wasn't really the case. Now, a main point Walker makes is that he says we sleep too little, a lot of us lack sufficient sleep and we should sleep more. And I guess this is what a lot of people take away from the book, that they try to sleep more. Now, Alexei Gazay, in his critical article about the book, he describes a few anecdotes of people who said, oh yeah, after reading the book, I wanted to sleep 8 hours and usually I only sleep 6. I tried to force myself and it didn't work, and I ended up developing insomnia due to that, which is obviously not what we want. Now, to my best knowledge, the sleep an individual needs is individual. It depends on the person. Some people need less sleep, some people need more sleep, so it's difficult to give a general recommendation. And also the CDC that Walker refers to in the book, that gives a recommendation for the amount of sleep, they say between 7 and 9 hours, which is obviously quite a wide range. So in the end, it depends. I think we shouldn't focus too much on this specific number of hours, this way around, specific number of hours, but we should focus on indicators that help us to notice if we sleep enough or if we lack sleep. And for that, the first thing we should do is to get rid of caffeine for a while. Because the effects of caffeine obviously can mask the issues that arise from a lack of sleep. So for a while we should give up coffee and tea and Coke and energy drinks, so we really have an authentic view of how we feel throughout the day, how tired we are. First thing of interest is how we feel when we get up in the morning. Are we energetic? Do we get out of bed easily? Or do we still feel tired? And do we really lack energy? This is the first good indicator if we have slept sufficiently in the night. And then our performance and how we feel throughout the day is important. Now, obviously, there is such a thing as a biorhythm. Most of you probably know we have a high point in the first half of the day and another high point in the second half, and somewhere in between there is a low point. Again, it's different for each person, but for most people this low point is somewhere around lunch or in the early afternoon. If you ever had a big meeting after lunch, you probably know what I'm talking about. So it's perfectly fine that you are a bit tired and don't have a lot of energy in that time window. However, usually throughout the day, you should not feel tired and you should be able to work sitting down, concentrated for prolonged time without getting tired. Small test you can also try is to lie down for 5 to 10 minutes and close your eyes and see if you fall asleep. And if you fall asleep, this is also a hint that you might not have gotten enough sleep during the night, because you shouldn't have this drive of sleep during the day, a drive to sleep during the day if you slept enough. And a nice test you can do if you have a couple of days off, if you have some vacation, is you go to bed at your usual time, like you always do, but you don't set an alarm in the morning. You just wake up when you naturally wake up. And then you take a note of the time that you woke up. And again, you watch how you feel throughout the day, because a duration of sleep is only one important factor. There's also quality of sleep. So if you didn't sleep well, even if you slept enough in regard to duration, you might still feel bad. So try it for a couple of days so you really get a good impression. And this might help you figure out your ideal duration of sleep. I think what I would recommend is not to make drastic changes in one go. So don't go from 6 hours to 8, for example, but make small adjustments over longer time, like small adjustment each week. And from my own experience, from my personal experience, this works better. And of course, we shouldn't be compulsive about all of this. We shouldn't try to force ourselves to anything, because forcing ourselves doesn't work in regard to sleep. You've probably all noticed that if you lie in bed in the evening and you say, I want to fall asleep right now, this never works. So go easy at this topic. One thing I took away from the book, despite all its flaws, is that I have a more positive attitude towards sleep. And enjoy sleep is probably not the right word, because we aren't really aware of ourselves while sleeping. But I go to bed and go to sleep with a feeling of there is something good and positive happening and something that's helpful for me. And I think this is a good way to approach sleep. That was a rather long channel update today. I hope we used the time well and you enjoyed the video. We will see each other again next week in the new Soft Skill Talk. For today I take my leave. Have a nice day and a good night. See you next time.